So the way I'm going to run this, I'm going to do a little presentation on kind of like the basics of flow, some best practices, and then we'll get into any type of Q&A session at the end of that. Does that sound good for everyone? All right. Cool. And can everyone see my screen?
I can.
Cool. All right, just want to make sure, because yes. I've done it before where I thought I was presenting, and then 20 minutes in, somebody said, "Hey, I haven't seen anything." And you're like, "Oh, that's because I wasn't presenting." But I want to make sure everyone can see before I get started. So I'm Jake. I run Salesforce Saturday here in Milwaukee. I work with Penrod. If you want to reach me on social media, I'm on Twitter at the address you see there at S4 Dark Knight. That's me. Let's get into why we all came here, and that's to learn about flows. Also, as I go through this, if there's questions along the way, feel free to ask them. I don't mind being interrupted. I just rather make sure you understand the material at the point where we're at, instead of waiting 20 minutes, making sure that as we go along here, all the content makes sense as we go through. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different things. We're going to talk about Git Records, the decision elements. We're going to talk about loops. We're going to talk about assignments. We're talking about create and update variables. Those are the most commonly used ones that most people use for flows. I'm not going to get too much into we'll discuss a little bit of the different types of flow, like before flows, screen flows, and auto launch flows. We're just going to kind of look at those. We're not going to, I don't going to have a deck portion of those. But first thing up here, we're going to talk about Git Records. And I think before I actually talk about all these cool elements, I think I should actually show you kind of what a sample of a flow would look like. I have this little flow I built out here. It's a screen flow. And it's called Batman the Rides. Not terribly complex, but it covers a lot of the things that we're talking about. It is a screen flow, so there's some user interaction incorporated with that. Essentially, we ask the user to select an account, and then we go through the contacts that are on that account, and then we go and gather all the contacts for that particular account. Then we loop through those contacts. And basically what we're going to be doing is, for each of the contacts, there's a coaster type field, and we're going to be assigning the type of coaster that they like to that particular contact. So then we're going to do some assignment stuff, and then we'll update those contacts, and then we have another screen. Basically, we want to say, hey, do you want to add some new writers to that particular account? And then if it's yes, and then we can go ahead and create some more records. We gather some information about the contact, and then we go ahead and create that record. Not terribly complex. We can run in debug mode here so you can actually see what it looks like, so you're not totally in the dark on that one. So I'm going to select my roller coaster account, and it did the query for me behind the scenes, and you can see here in the debug log, it went and found all my writers. So now I'm looping through those. I'm on my first iteration. I can change the coaster type. You can say Catwoman likes to go into the crazy fast ones, and then James Gordon likes to go a little bit slower. The Joker is fast. Harley Quinn, she's also crazy fast. Two-Face, I don't have an image for, but we can say that he's medium. And then Clayface, he's slow. And then we also have Bruce Wayne, he's going to be in the medium range. And then Alfred, he's slow as well. And then you're prompted with the user if they want to create a new writer, and we can say sure. And then we can type in a name, and I'm just going to put myself in here. And then I just go ahead and create a record. So it's kind of a cool, simple process on that front. If we really wanted to see how that worked, let me just hop over to an account. We'll go to that roller coaster account that we started here. And if we scroll down to our contacts, we'll see there's a bunch in there, and we can see that Jake B was just recently created a matter of a couple minutes ago. See? Cool. All right. So now back to flows, and I'm gonna go back between the demo org and the slide here just for an example. So we're gonna talk about getting records. So that means we're gonna talk about this portion here. We're getting Git Records here. There's actually a Git in here as well, but there's a couple of different ways you can get record. Basically, that's a query for something within Salesforce. All right, go ahead and hit present again. So Git Records, the good use cases for that. Sorry, that's my dog in the background. Basically, you want to get records to use something in your flow. You can use Git Records in a pick list, and typically when you get records, you can look for a single record if you want. So you can specify a single record, like I want to go find a exact record that looks like this, or a collection, which is a group of records, meaning that like we saw when I looked up for all those contacts that I looped through, that was a collection of contacts that I found, versus just having a single contact for that particular account. When you want to get a single record, this is kind of just how you set it up. This is how it looks. You know, you have your label, you have your description. If you're doing, you need to specify the object. So this particular scenario, I was looking for a contact, and then I can add some additional criteria. So I can specify the conditions are met. I can say the account ID equals the record ID. If I was launching this from an account, I could do that. This doesn't really match with what the flow is doing because I'm pulling it from the screen flow. But essentially, you can find, this would find all the contacts where the account ID would equal whatever your variable is at that point. And then you can sort your contacts. You can sort them either ascending or descending. And you can also specify which field you want them to search by. A lot of times you can do it by name. You can do it by any means that basically any field on the record you want, you can sort by. And then if you want a single record, you say, I only want to return the first record. And if you want all the records, you say all the records. This is kind of a cool section here. How do we want to store the data? In previous versions of Flow, you'd have to assign all your different variables to the fields that you want to gather. But to Salesforce, in the newest release here, we have the automatically store our fields, which is a great feature. Basically means that we don't have to go gather any of the fields that we want, that we need to use for those particular records that we're querying later on in our flow. It's all ready to go. And Salesforce does all the work for us, so why do more work than what we have to? Because when we use those fields later on, Salesforce is smart enough to actually only query the fields that we use in the flow versus us telling it what we want to do. Get a single record. It's only the first record. It finds the first record, and if you have more than one record that matches your results, could differ each time. That's where some of those filters may come in play. If you want to find the first record and you do it off a create date, you can say, show me the one that's most recently created, or show me the very first one that was created. So that's where you could kind of use additional filtering mechanisms to find out exactly which record you want. You can also look for specific records you want. If you have an ID, you can say, hey, go find this particular record that matches this Salesforce ID. And if you get all the records, that just basically takes all your records and puts them into a collection that we can utilize later on, and then evaluate those individual records when we go through our loops. All right, kind of talked about this already. So what I just said before, automatically store the fields. This is easy to figure out the fields and records that you're querying for. You want to choose your fields and let Salesforce do the rest. Basically, you have to tell the flow what fields you want to gather, and then later on, and then you can also choose the fields and assign variables. Then you can actually assign. You have to go create a variable and then assign the value from that particular lookup that you've done to that particular variable. You can use that later on. This is how it originally was done, and then this was their second iteration. Then this is the most current, and this is actually the easiest in the way that Salesforce actually recommends you do queries. Doesn't mean you can't do it other ways. There's good use cases for all of these, but for the most part, if you do this, you can do anything here as well. Oh, on screen. You can do a Git Records and a screen flow. You can do that by doing a record choice set, and then you specify you can specify the API name, you specify the object, and then you would specify some conditions. And I can actually show you what this looks like in a minute here. So on our flow here, this screen select here, when I said I want to show you that account, I actually created a choice called accounts. And what that actually looks like is we go over here to our manager and we find our record choice set. So this is how we create a choice set and a screen flow. And if we want to do records, that's what we do here. I've actually created a filter on mine, basically I only want my active accounts, and just switching the account object, and I'm not doing any special sort or anything like that, not maximizing my choices. I will state that if you have over 200 records in here, it's only show the first 200 that it finds. So you may want to put a limit like that on there if you wanted to limit. So this is all I'm doing here, saying search the account object for accounts that are active. And then this is the configure each choice. This is kind of the nice little feature here. The choice label. This is when I presented the screen and I listed all the different accounts that I have. So you saw the coaster account, all that. That's the label that's going to show there. And then you can specify a data type with the choice value. Rather than storing the name of the account that I selected, I actually wanted to store the ID of the account. So that's how we'd set it up here. So I was able to do that. And I also use it again down here to store the account ID there as well. So that way I can use the actual Salesforce ID later in my flow versus trying to use a name, because sometimes you have records that have the same name. So that's not always the best practice. It's better to use those Salesforce IDs behind the scenes. So this is just kind of showing you that kind of what that looks like. So that's kind of how we get records in Salesforce. Any questions around that so far? All right. The next portion here we're going to talk about is decisions, and that is this point right here. I know it's a little bit later in our flow here, but basically we're looking for some type of outcome, and based upon some data in our flow, we want to make a decision. So we have a fork in the road. We can have more than one decision. Mine has 2. You can have 2, 3, 4, 5. I think the most I've ever seen is 10. It's a little hard to manage, but you can build your decision points. Basically, something needs to happen, and you want to do a little fork in the road there. So on my decision here, I want to know, do you want to create a new writer? And if the answer is yes, we create a writer. If no, we go back into the selecting accounts and all that fun stuff. Alrighty, let's go back into our deck here and continue on. So flow decisions, they're not terribly complex. Basically, you need to do something based on some information. Allows you to build a fork in your flow. When it comes to decision, you give it a label. You can have outcomes. You can use by default, it comes with a default outcome. Basically, if none of the criteria matches, that's what it's going to use. I always prefer to any of the decision points I want on there, I prefer to have them all written out. It's just one of my pet peeves. I like to make sure that if that scenario exists, I have a plan for it. And then any other thing that doesn't happen, then that would fall into that default outcome, because maybe I don't want anything to happen with it. I want it to error out or something of that nature. So basically, give it a label. You can specify conditions. I have all. You can do or. Then you can pull resources from your flow and then have them equal to some variable or value that you have in there, and then you can basically, if that condition is met, it's going to follow that path that you designed for it for whichever outcome it is. All right. Any question on decisions? They're not terribly complex to understand. Loops are particularly where I lose a lot of people. And loops are in our flow. This is what this is. The loop here is these 4 blocks here, where I have basically I'm taking my records here, and I'm looping through all of them to do that screen selection process where I was presenting the users, or not the contacts, and specifying their coaster type. Then I was assigning those updates, and then I was actually assigning that back to a collection for updates. And we'll get a little bit into that here, and we'll also talk about more. We'll talk about updating records. All right. If we go to back here, we talk about flow. I always, whenever I talk about loops, I automatically think about roller coasters because I forgot I had that on there. Confused me at first. So whenever I think of loops, I think of a roller coaster because it just makes sense because you have a queue of people lined up to take the roller coaster, then you go around and then you exit it out. So there's some terms I just want to put out there real quick. These are taken directly from Salesforce's help knowledge, so that's and this is where that comes from. So the first thing I want to talk about is a collection variable, and basically that is the collection of records that you want to loop through. So when you build a loop, you need a collection in order to loop through all that information. Otherwise, there's no way really to loop. The direction of the loop, basically, you want to specify where do you want to start. Do you want to start at the top? Do you want to start at the bottom? How do you want to start that direction? And then the loop variable. This is one of the more important things to understand about loops is there's the collection, and then there's a loop variable. The loop variable is actually it specifies one of the records in your collection, and then the collection variable, if it's set to a non-record collection variable, the field accepts a variable with the same data type. So you can build a loop with just fields if you really want to, or this example I have, it's a loop collection of records, so we're looking through actual records. That field accepts a record variable with the same object type. So luckily for us, with the new flows, we don't have to get really crazy in on how to build them out. So what is a loop? Like I said before, basically it's the line that you going to the roller coaster is your collection. So there's all the people that are queued up, ready to go into the roller coaster. The car that goes around the roller coaster, that is your loop variable. So that's your one iteration around the loop, around the roller coaster there. And then the coaster itself is a loop. That's the best analogy I could think of actually how to explain what a loop is. And we'll go ahead and take a look at a loop right now. So this loop right here, if I open it up here, we're referencing the collection variable, which was the Git coaster riders. So one of the cool things with the newer flows here is that it can reference it recognizes that this Git records here, since it was a multiple, I was getting more than one records here. I recognize that this is going to be a collection. So this is my collection of records right here. And when I loop through that, I'm specifying that is my collection of records. So my Git records, this is my collection of the records. I'm specifying first item and the last item. And then when I actually go through my loop here, and my screen here, my first screen here, you can see that I'm displaying some images, and you can see the make line of riders. So what I did was I had to create the name of the loop right here. We created that loop there. It created this variable. This right here is your single variable. This is your loop variable that I've been referring to. This is going to represent one of your records within the loop. And so when we first go through here, I'm just displaying some information. So make a line of the riders. That's the name of that loop. That's specifying one of those people or one of those contacts that I have in that collection. And then I also have a prompt here where I have a field where they can select. And then I'll get into assignments in the next section here, but I'll just kind of walk through what's going here. Then I've also then assigned the current item from the loop, make a line. So I'm doing an assignment. I'm basically taking the field of the coaster type and assigning the value from the the screen that's up here, this screen here, this value that they picked in here, I'm assigning it to the value of that particular record. So I'm going ahead and taking the value from that screen and assigning it to that particular variable loop that I have in there. So I have all the different fields available at my disposal here. So if I go ahead and we're to poster type here, I'm not going to save this, but we can definitely take a look. You can see that all these different fields on the account are available for us to use. So I can add a bunch of different fields here, assign different values to them at this point. But this right here is my collection variable. So this is representing just that one particular person in the flow or in this loop versus all the writers. And then I'm doing a little assignment here, and I'll talk a little bit more of this when we talk about assignments, which is the next section. But basically, I'm taking my current iteration that I have, that current variable that I have, and assigning it to my update writers, which this is a different collection that I created that I'm going to use later on in the flow. So I have the collection for my Git Records here, and I've also created a new collection where I'm assigning all the flow variables that I have to a different collection so I can use that later on in my flow. So actually this Git updates here, that's actually using my writers update. So that's a collection that I created. I just went over to my manager and I created my collections here. I just went over and created a new resource for creating this. So I created a new writers. You just specify the data type, and this is a particular record. I say I'm going to allow multiple values, so that makes it a collection. And then I specify the options, and that's pretty much all you have to do is set that up. Once you have that, sorry about my dogs. It's morning time, so it means it's time to eat and play. So once we have that, we close our loop off, and then we do our update after the fact. Any questions around loops right now? Alrighty.
Jay?
Yep.
The loop variable and the collection variable. So, yeah. I mean, I understood the part of collection variable where we need to define it, but where did you define the loop variable? So, will that be seen on the the pop-up wherein on the model, wherein here enter your loop variable or enter your collection variable?
Right. So, in the newer version of Flows, the collection variable was my Git Records here. So by default, Salesforce is smart enough now that if you're doing a query and it's multiple records, I'll create that as a collection for you. So I don't have to actually specify this as a collection variable. It just does it for me behind the scenes because it's a record. If you're getting multiple records and you're getting you're just getting multiple records, so it's going to say, hey, this is going to be a collection. And then it's also smart enough to know that when you start a loop, what it's going to do is it's basically, you specify the collection. This was my Git Coaster Writers. That was my Git right here. Once I have that, it specifies there. The name of the loop is actually what your collection variable is. So that's actually the variable that you're going to use. That this is going to represent the one individual writing through this particular loop. Or the particular record that's right into that loop. So what happens is the name of that loop becomes your this right here becomes the name of your collection variable, the single variable that represents one iteration through that loop. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Back before this, you could, if you really want to, you could do a bunch of assignments and stuff like that. You used to actually have to go create a collection, add your query to that collection. Then you used to have to actually create the variable for the single record there. You used to have to do that. With the new flows, you don't have to do that, so they made it a little bit simpler. But it's also not as intuitive as it was before because you used to have to make those deliberate steps. You don't have to do those anymore. So that's where this comes into play. It makes it a little bit easier to work with these tools because they just make the collections for you, to make the variables for you. And then when you want to reference them, you're just going to make a line with the writers and name, and that's going to say that it's make a line with the writers. That's the name of the loop. That's just specifying the value of so this is specifying the name, and then I also have an image field that's specifying that I want me to show this particular field for that particular value in the loop there. I like to do mine a little more visual because I think it's a little bit easier to see what's going on there. And then I just did the assignments, and we'll talk about assignments right here, right now, actually. So let me go through that portion. So flow assignments here. We have our variables. Basically, those are the values that you want to change. We have our operators, and these are basically going to be dependent on what the data type is. So if it's a record, we can do certain things. If it's a collection variable, we can do certain things. If it's currency, if it's text fields, we can do certain types of things on that front as well. The value, this is the variable, and value must be compatible. You must have compatible data type, so you can't update a number field with text, that type of thing. And then the value, it can be an existing flow resource, so it can be something that we use in the flow. We can create a new resource at this point, so we could go create a formula field or something like that if you want. Or you can also just manually enter a literal value or merge field. Sorry about that. So when we actually do the assignment, we can actually just say, I want it to equal 1 if it's a number field, and we can just specify that. Thank you. Some common use cases to use basically what we use to assign variables and values to a variable. So in my example, I have on my flow there, I have the variable where I have my coaster type preference for that particular contact, and I'm just saying it's equal in that coaster type, which is the value from the screen that we selected beforehand. And I'm just straight up in a collection here saying I'm going to assign that value from the coaster screen to the value on that particular record. And then we can also add those loop variables that we have. We can add them to our collection. So in this particular scenario, I created a collection called update writer. And what I'm saying in this particular scenario is take that loop variable that I had, that single record that we had, and I'm going to add it to a new collection. So this is how I can create a collection of records. So whatever the values that I assign to this overall, all the fields, all the values that are assigned to that, any updates I made to that are going to be in there, and I'm going to add those values, or I add that record to a collection, and that collection we can use later on for an update. I think so. On our assignment here, as we were talking about there, that's the coaster type that's coming from the screen selection process right there. And we're saying that equals that picklist field on the contact of coaster type. So we're saying whatever value, if it's fast, slow, super crazy fast, we're going to take that value and make it equal to the variable in our loop variable right there. We can take a look at the operators here. You can see there's not a lot to add here. There's equals and adds, but if I were to go ahead and add an assignment here, and I'm going to go ahead and get my if I go ahead and grab birth date, I can actually say equals, and I can actually just do today's date if I want. Actually, I can just do this. Oh, it doesn't like that. So we'll do 12. What's today's date? 12, 2020. So I can do that, and I'll assign that person's birthday at that point. And then that's all we're doing here is that. You can see that I can do add, subtract. That's a date field. We can do some special things with that. So whatever the data types are, you get some different operators based on that. Then I always do whenever I assign a loop variable back to a collection, I always do that in a different step. You're allowed to do it here, but I've always noticed when I've done it that the changes don't seem to take place. So any like my record update for the coaster type there, if I add that both in this particular thing, this particular here, and I add that next step as a step in this assignment here, whenever I do that, I notice that it doesn't always take the updates correctly. So I always like to separate them out to make sure that it's correct. So what we're doing in this particular scenario, we're taking that current item from that loop, which is the individual that's being looped through this particular record here. We're taking that particular value and we're adding it to that collection of update writers. So we created that collection variable called update writers, and we're just adding all the new writers back to this collection because we're going to update them later on in our flow, right here actually, with the values that we selected for the coaster type. So then we close up the loop, so that completes the whole loop. We come back through here, and then we do update records. Next section.
Can I ask a quick question?
Sure.
So the first Git Records element, that's basically creating a collection variable, but
Yep.
your second assignment element, that's creating a new collection variable that's going to hold all the records that have successfully gone through the loop?
Correct.
Okay.
In theory, you could have signed this back to this original collection if you really wanted to, and then updated it here. I prefer not to do that. I like to do them separately. It just keeps it a little bit cleaner, because this is your Git records, this is your and then you have your record that's being done for updates. You could use the same the same collection right there. I prefer not to, and there's a lot of times there's use cases where when you actually loop it through here and you could be doing a decision within your flow in your loop here, and you're actually filtering out records, and you maybe don't want to update records, all the records that you did a query for before. You only want to update the records that you're actually updating. In this scenario, I could have done that, use the same collection here for this update, but I like to keep it separate. If I ever add any additional complexity in here where I was doing something where I was filtering out things I was moving along, this makes my life easier later on, because I have that update right there instead of trying to update this. Because if I filter out records on this right here, and I try to do update here, I'll take all the changes for the new records, but it's also going to potentially update the other records. It's going to may not necessarily update them, but it's definitely going to waste some time of trying to see if it has to update other records, because it's still part of that collection. Whereas this is a brand new collection, it's only whatever I put in there.
Is that also how you would get one of the ways you could get an infinite loop, is if you didn't have that second collection variable?
Not necessarily. Infinite loop would be if I'm trying to think how to write that in there. It's more like, since I have this closed off here, you could potentially do that. But when you do this Git right here, it's closing it off. But yeah, you could essentially do that. I think keeping it separate is going to keep it a little bit cleaner.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you for explaining that.
Yeah. All right. Where was that? Hold on. No, you're not using Daddy's computer. So now the last section here we're going to talk about is creating and updating records within flows. Sorry about that. My little one wants to use my computer. So we have our update records in here. We have our update records here. We also have a create record here, and all that. So let me go through my slide deck real quick here, and then we will we'll circle back to that flow with actually some of the use cases there. So the first thing we're going to talk about is update records. When you update a record, there's three ways basically you can update records. You can update a record using the update records, where you specify the criteria and all that fun stuff. You can also do update records where you specify a collection. And then you can also use quick actions. Quick actions are a little bit of a finicky topic, to be honest. First thing when it comes with quick actions, you can only update one record at a time. May not necessarily be what you want. Other thing to note with quick actions is that whatever the fields that are in your quick action are the only fields that are available for the update. So we have a couple ways to update records. With the quick action, you need to update exactly only one record. You already have the populated variable with the record ID, so make sure one of the assumptions if you're doing updates that the record already exists. The quick actions layer also includes all the fields you need to update. So you can see here, these are the fields from the quick action that they created. If you don't have all the values that you want that are available here, then the quick action may not be what you do. So if you're doing an update and you are updating some fields that are part of the quick action is probably not the tool that you're looking for the update. You're probably looking for the standard update records. This is for a single record. So we're specifying an ID. In the scenario, they're specifying the ID of an opportunity, and they're saying that we're going to make the stage name close loss, and then we're also updating the close date with the current date from the flow. So this is updating just a single record, similar to the action, except that we get to specify additional criteria. We also get to specify all the fields that we want to update, and they're not driven by the action itself. And then last one, you've actually seen it a couple of times in my demo folder, is the update where we give it a collection. So this is my update writers collection. And I'm basically saying whatever values are in this particular collection, go run that update for that. When it comes to create records, you can create records. You can do them singly, where you can create a single record. You can also do create records from a collection as well. Just I'm doing an update. Works exactly the same. You put records into a collection, and instead of saying update, you're saying create, and it goes and creates those records. When you do a create update like that, it's assuming that there is no Salesforce ID. If you have a Salesforce ID already assigned to that record, create's not going to work. Quick actions, same concept as the update. The ID doesn't exist, but all the fields have to be in that action to work, and all that. And if you want to mass create records, you want to use that collection variable, so you can you have your collection that's created, and then you can basically within here you specify how you want to create, and then you pass it that collection variable within there. There's some simple best practices when you're creating update records. Do it outside of loops. Didn't say that before, but whenever you loop, you don't want to create records in there. That's going to basically almost always a guarantee for eventually that flow to time out on you from too many either record locks. Typically, record locks is the big thing that would happen is when you're creating records because it's sharing things of that nature. It prevents the flow from running. Especially when you're doing auto launch flow. So if you have an auto launch flow running and you do a mass update to whatever object that flow is running on, it's typically going to cause that flow to error out. So that's why we like to do all those updates outside of that loop, just because it's a little more concise and it's going to basically bulkify that flow in. And I'll also try to use collections to create records, especially if it's a flow triggered. So just honing in my point there. So let's go back to our flow. So our first update here, which I've shown before, this is updating that assignment that we have here, and we're just passing that collection. We're saying use the IDs and the fields that are on that record to specify, and we're just saying update writers. And it's just going to go take the IDs from those records that we have signed there, and it's going to update the information with the new information that we did this other assignment. Pretty straightforward. And then if we were to do I'll just pull one of these update records in here. If we wanted to specify the conditions, we would give it an object, and this is contact. And you can specify conditions. You can do whatever you want. Typically, you do like ID equals some of the variables that we have in there, and then you can specify the values that you want in there. This is kind of like an assignment, but doing that as a one-off basis instead of doing a bunch of assignments added into a collection. This is just doing this as a one-off. One of the other ways, so those are the kind of the two ways you can update. I have a create records. So this is just the standard. I want to create a single record. So I'm just creating one record. I'm specifying the object. And then you're specifying the field. So I have the account name, the first name and last name. That's all the information I gathered from the user for the information they wanted, and then we're getting an account name from early on when we did that screen selection process, or when we did that in here. We grabbed that account originally. We get that account ID, so we can actually say we want to make this the we want to make sure that this contact is being added to that account that we selected. The create records for a collection will be very similar to the updates. You just specify, instead of this, it just specifies the conditions to update, and then you just give it the collection. So that looks like this. You just say multiple, and you just give it the collection. And then it is assuming that all the records in this particular collection do not have any IDs. A common use case for this type of scenario is like if you have an opportunity with opportunity products and you need to go create an order, you can go create an order, you can take all the information, you can then do a query for all the opportunity product lines, and then you do an assignment, assign all the values to the order line items, and then you go here and create the new order line items behind the scenes, and then that gets all the information ready to go. And then the last thing here is this action. And I created a core action, or a contact, an action on contact, and it allows me. I said I want the name field and the account field. Just remember, when you have a contact or a lead, when you specify name, it pulls in last name, first name, and also your salutation. So that's why those are available. I also had account on there, so I can pass the account ID. One thing to note: certain core actions or certain actions, when you use them, they want this related record ID. So in this particular scenario, the core action for the contact, I made one here. It had name on there, account ID, but also has a related record ID. And this is actually looking for a, this is the reports to field on the contact. So this is actually saying, hey, they're trying to enforce the reports to field to be populated. So that was undesirable in my scenario because I don't want to fill in the report to field because I don't have that structure set up, and I don't need to set up that structure. So this was one of the reasons why the core action for the new writer here, I didn't want to put in here because I didn't want to specify that. But you can see the value of having that action there. I just don't see it as useful and as helpful. The only time it would be really helpful is if you already have this core action using it somewhere else, and then you need to use in flow, and all these parts are the parts that I already need. I'm just going to use this instead of adding all the different fields I may have on there. So for the most part, I see this being used maybe 1% of the time, and then all the other types of updating are going to be used for the remaining time. And that concludes the bulk of this. One of the things that you may be wondering is I've been talking about screen flow versus auto launch flow. If I go back to, I don't care what the changes that I made there. If I go back to flows and quick new flow, there's a couple of different things that we can do with flows. So these are your core flows. You also have template flows if you have, so you can do, these are the kind of like pre-built solutions. If I go back to here, we have our screen flow. That's kind of what I was demoing there. It's a user, the end user interacts with the flow, provides input. Scheduled trigger flow. This is kind of a cool one. This right here is going to be you create a flow and you tell it to run daily, weekly, whatever that frequency you want in there. So that's how you launch that one. So it can do all the things that a normal a auto launch flow can do, but the schedule is going to tell it when to run. So if you want to run a daily batch job, you can do that in Apex. You can also run a scheduled flow trigger to do that. The frequency isn't as fine-tuned as something you can do with Apex auto Apex batch flow there, but the scheduled trigger does a pretty good job. Auto launch flows, basically these are things that you want to call. You can be invoked by Apex or process builders and things of that nature. So you can create a auto launch flow, but there's no triggering mechanism behind it. So it has to have something to launch it. Record trigger flow. This is where there's some criteria that's on the particular record, and if that criteria is met, then it calls this particular flow. And then if you have if you're doing platform event based, you can also use that to trigger flows as well. All right. Any questions around that type of stuff? Because that actually concludes my presentation. So this will be the Q&A portion of it. Any questions about the content before we get into that?
Just a quick question on the record you create. So can we schedule it also? So the flow with record creations, can I schedule it? Let's say if I create a record and after a certain amount of time, I want to execute one logic. Let's say I want to call Apex class. Is it possible to do that?
Are you asking, can you call Apex from flows?
Yeah.
Yes, you can definitely call Apex in your flow, and you can actually do the vice versa. You can actually call flows from your Apex as well. So I don't have any Apex classes in here, but basically it would be your
and so my question is, can I schedule it? So let's say I have a record which gets created, and let's say after 5 minutes I want to call a class.
Yeah, you can do where is that? Is this in here? I'm trying to remember. There used to be a wait period where you could actually. I'm trying to remember if it's in the actions or. So you're saying you want to create a record, then wait 5 minutes to call the Apex?
Yeah. So the idea is to break the transaction. So let's say I have to do a very complex logic after certain records gets inserted. And I don't want to, let's say I am creating that record through an API call. I don't want to, continue that transactions. So after a certain amount of time, I want to execute a logic, something like that.
Yeah, I think there was a way to pause. All right, so in the screen flow it's not there, but if I go back to my flow, if I go back here in an auto launch flow, I can't remember where it was at. If I just do a auto launch flow here and I click next, we'll do that. There is this pause. So you can specify, hey, I want it to pause when the condition's met, and then you specify how long you want it to wait.
Okay, got it.
And then you could call your Apex from there. And I believe the Apex, it's one of your actions that you can call there. And that's only for, you can only do the pause with auto launch flow. So like you saw in the screen flow there, I didn't have that pause option there. Only certain flow types have that pause capability. So just be mindful. If you can call Apex from any type of the flows, but some of these elements only exist in certain types of flows.
Okay, got it.
Cool. Any other questions?
Hey, Jake. I have one. This is Mike.
Hey, Mike.
I have a scenario that I've been trying to work through. I inherited an org that they needed to identify the product family on the account in order for their integration with HubSpot. And what I found is that it doesn't keep an accurate. It doesn't keep it up to date with the current product, and it's not too elaborate with their product families. There's only 3 really at the moment. And I was wondering if I would be able to use a flow to loop through closed won opportunities and determine if the end date, which I get from that's related to it, and say I'm populating that on the background on the opportunity, if I could loop through those and then actually deselect a checkbox on the account, because all those product families are checkboxes. This might be too elaborate, but I was just wondering what your thoughts were, or if you've dealt with it in a different way, or something like that.
So what you're asking is, on the account, you have a bunch of checkboxes that specify product family, correct?
Correct.
And then you have opportunities that I take it you specify that there's a product family on those opportunities.
Yep.
And then what determines if one of those is checked versus unchecked?
There was a process builder that when an opportunity was closed won, the product family would then check the box on the account. It's just, there wasn't anything built to uncheck it if that opportunity's contract length, which that's a whole nother thing, but we can leave that out. With end date, I would like it to be unchecked.
Yeah, so what you could do is you could definitely build a flow that looks to see what I would do is for any of the product families that are checked, I would go query to see if those opportunities exist, if those opportunities they should exist, and if they exist, what is the end date for those contracts or however you want to do that. You could definitely use Flow to go query those records, and then it might be multiple queries that you have to run for that. That you might have to look up each product family the way you have it designed. You may have to go look at that. And if you really wanted to automate it, you can actually make that as a scheduled flow. So you can say run every day to go run updates. That might get a little taxing on your system though, so you might want to do it like once a month. You can also build that as a button. You could call a flow from button to say like do that.
Monthly would be good. That's a good point, because really the contracts are.
Yeah, if there's a particular date that like works, you might want to you could do a schedule flow that would say I'm going to run on the day after that. Thanks, Rachel. So yeah, you could do that, and then just make it run that way. I think that might be a good start to that particular problem. In all actuality, you may want to rethink how all that is set up. It's probably not the best scenario, but if you have other things based on it, then you may have to deal with it.
Yeah, that's kind of my thinking too. Main thing was I was hoping that it could be solved within Flow instead of having to work with a thing.
Yeah, you can definitely do it in a Flow. It's just it may be a little bit if you're only doing the schedule once a month, it shouldn't be a problem. If you're doing daily, you could see it as being start taxing the system a little bit there. But yeah, you can definitely do that in Flow, and it wouldn't be too complex. I mean, once you figure out how to do it for one, it's just repeating for all the others.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you do have the clone functionality within here as well, so don't forget about that too. So any element that you create, you can always clone it and then change things in that. So if you figure out once, you can clone all the pieces and just keep cloning it.
Okay. All right, give it a shot. Thank you, Jake.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Jake, regarding Mike's problem, so we will be writing a query on opportunities and fetching them by the opportunity product type or whatever may be the criteria. And will we be able to update the related accounts? So do we have any limitations on finding the related accounts through flows? I mean, related objects through flows?
So are you talking about like you have a particular record and you want to find it? So whenever you do a query, you can specify whatever object you want. So if you know what the related list is, you can go do a query for that particular related list. Is that what you're asking?
No, next scenario, he's saying like he wants to query the opportunities and then like run over them, and based on some criteria, he wants to go and update accounts, right? So my question is, are there any limitations? Like usually, like for validation rules, we say that 5 levels deep we can go up, and 1 level deep, something like that. We have some limitations, right?
So
Fetching related objects. So do they have anything like that close to?
yeah, the only really limitations you have in here is if you don't know, because when you do updates, like when you do an update, when you do a query, since you get to specify what you want, there's no real limitations on that, like how you had a process build, like it had to be a related record in order to do the update. I could do a query for an opportunity, and then I could turn around and create a case for that. And I may have the account ID in there if I want, but the objects don't have to be related to each other. They can be totally separate, and you can just do totally different things if you want with them, because you control when you create things, how you create them, why you want to create them. You control all those aspects. I think if I'm understanding your question, that's what you're looking for.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I think that's the major difference between process build and flow.
Because you have complete control over your creating updates and all that fun stuff. So if it like in my flow there that I had before, like I can do whatever I want with this, because I can just say, hey, I want to go create a record now, and I can say I'm going to go create a contract, or some custom object to have that's never related to anything I'm talking about. I can just do it in the flow here if I wanted to, and just create something, put values in there if I want it. That's not going to prevent me from doing anything, because the flow is smart enough to do whatever it tells you to do. So that's kind of a cool functionality with that.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? No touch. Well, then, no other questions. Thank you for coming. It was nice having everyone on. I hope you learned something today. And have happy holidays, and I'll see everyone next year.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Jack.
Okay,
Jack,
bye.
can you please share this record session to my email ID? Is it possible?
I don't have your email address, and don't put in the.
Can I drop in this chat box?
I wouldn't put it in there because that shows up in the recording. What I would do is just find me on LinkedIn and hit me up there, and I will share it there. I'm going to post this on YouTube, so you'll see the link there. I'll also post it on social media once it's published.
Okay.
I'm going to go ahead and stop recording.